Hello, everyone. It's so good to have all these wonderful faces here today. And I can assure you that we have some really cool stuff lined up that will inspire you to think of utilizing some advanced and native Quickbase functionality in a design review use case. So we're going to talk about how Jacob sets some expectations with Quickbase using accountability and transparency. My name is Nashmia Burney. And with me, I have my partner presenting, Kat Valentine. So just a little bit of background about me. I am a senior solutions consultant at Quickbase. I used to be a former customer of Quickbase, working as a project manager and a business analyst in the ATM manufacturing industry. I utilize Quickbase a lot for solving multiple complex business problems. And I'm not somebody who comes from an extensive coding or programming background. I'm somebody who's an econ major who happened to become an accidental solutions consultant at Quickbase. That's how I like to put it. So studying economics had always taught me to look at opportunity costs of a solution or a problem. But using Quickbase really helped me discover a whole new realm of possibilities beyond that of opportunity costs. And I won't lie, there are times when I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my God, Quickbase can do that. So I really just started thinking a lot about how I could streamline processes and automate manual business tasks with the use of Quickbase in any given area of my business. And it's been a wonderful journey, and I love what I do. And I'm on a personal mission to enable those who are closest to their work to do the same thing. So today with me, I have Kat Valentine, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what Jacobs is. So Kat, I'll have you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kat. My background is kind of the opposite of Nashmia's. I have a degree in software engineering. I love to code. I was hired on as a software developer. That's all I do for Jacobs. But even though I really enjoy coding, and at first I was very skeptical of low code and no code solutions, I found that Quickbase is really great for delivering business value very quickly, especially in situations where you have rapidly changing requirements. And we have built systems that are, like C#, .NET, that sort of thing for very customized situations. But we really run into the issue of our requirements change, and it takes us so long to change those customized applications to suit our new needs. But with Quickbase, a lot of times I could be sitting in a meeting and someone will ask for a change, and while they're talking and debating what they want, I just go in there and do it. And then they look to me like, oh, how long will it take? And I can just say, it's done. And everyone's amazed, thinks I'm a wizard. So it's really cool for me.
Yes, you are a wizard. Thank you, Kat. All right, so let's talk about our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what Jacobs is and how Jacobs uses Quickbase in their environment. So just an overview of Jacobs. Then we're going to talk about some of the challenges that Kat faced before having Quickbase in place. Then Kat is going to go into demo mode and show us what her workflow of the design review application looks like. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Quickbase advanced native functionality. So we're going to look at webhooks and also data validation rules inside of Kat's app. So let's talk a little bit about Jacobs. So Kat, can you tell us a little bit about who Jacobs is?
Jacobs is a very large multinational architectural and engineering design firm. We're on, I think, every continent except Antarctica, of course. We have tens of thousands of employees. We work in all sorts of different sectors. We do like nuclear plant decommissioning, water plant or water treatment plant designs, bridges, buildings that are really complex. So basically, if it's a complex engineering problem, we're likely involved in it. The group that I'm in is the electronics group, which mostly designs semiconductor fabs and data centers. So what that means is we don't design the actual process that builds chips, but we design the building and we lay out the tools and we make sure all the like structural support is there and all the electrical and all the parts that make it work. And we design everything for them from the ground up. So those are very gigantic designs, complicated. They're multiple acres, have thousands and thousands of little things to keep track of. So we use Quickbase to help us manage those designs.
Wow, sounds very exciting. Next question. When were you personally introduced to Quickbase?
So I worked for Jacobs 5 years now, and when I started as an intern, a few months after I started, I got put on a project where we had been given the scoping application for a semiconductor fab design, and uh, I think it was given to us by another company, but we basically put all of our scope in there, so everything involved in the design, and it helped us because we were able to collaborate more easily with other partners and companies, which was something that we struggled with before. And from there, we just started working on putting more and more stuff in there because that was a success. So we started looking at things that were in spreadsheets and access databases and thinking, what can we do to integrate these things together, make it easier to collaborate, make it so we can have change control or make it easier to make updates, all that sort of thing. So now we have a whole bunch of new apps, including the design review comment app that we'll go over today.
Very cool. Can you tell us a little bit about how Quickbase added some value? So maybe, when was your personal aha moment?
For me, it was we had the scoping app built, as I said, and we had a partner, another company that we worked with who was building their own application, not in Quickbase, but for the same general purpose. It was a scoping application. And they were trying to convince everyone to use their app instead of ours. But management reviewed both applications and they came to the conclusion that uh, the Quickbase app was just more suitable because we were able to make changes. And when we found shortcomings on the other app, it was going to be weeks or months before they could change it. And ours, like I said, sometimes you can make it in the moment. At worst, it might be a few days. And now to this day, that other company that tried to build their own internal thing, they now use our scoping app. So
Yes,
I think that's pretty cool that we were able to convince them. It took a long time, but they came around.
that is absolutely brilliant. So how many apps does Jacobs have on Quickbase today?
Well, we regularly run into the application limit. A lot of times that's kind of the limit of someone says, hey, let's make this new app. We're like, oh, I gotta delete one and make some room. So we probably have maybe half dozen applications that serve completely different purposes. And we tend to have different instances of those for each project. So the design review comments will have a multiple instance of each app for the different projects. And we might tweak them a little bit to suit whether it's a bigger project, smaller project, what kind of things they want to track.
Wow. And are there different use cases for those applications?
Yeah, so like I said, we have the scoping app, design review comments. We have things like equipment lists, work registers, um, really all sorts of stuff that are in there. If it's something that we find that we're tracking at all, or we want to run metrics on it, or if we're trying to get it integrated with something else in the data that we have in Quickbase, we tend to put it in Quickbase. We're putting more and more stuff in there all the time.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges that Jacobs faced before having Quickbase in place. So let's get to that. Kat, can you explain some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, so a big challenge for us is anything that's hosted internally on our network. It's very difficult for us to give access to it to external parties. And one of our big things that our company is proud of is we collaborate not just internally, but externally with our clients and our trade partners and everyone who's involved in these designs. So being able to put our uh, data collection tools up on Quickbase where they worry about all the security because our clients are very concerned about that. And they can worry about like the access and all that. And I just have to be able to type in email addresses and it's good to go. So that was a big plus for us. If it's externally facing, we almost always go to Quickbase first. Another thing which I mentioned before is just it's very agile. If I need to make a change, add a new field, add a new table, or even a whole new application, I'm sure we've all been in the case where management says, oh, we need this thing to track this in 2 days. And if I were building it anything else, it would be impossible. But in Quickbase, I can do it. And being able to keep up with our changing needs is really valuable to us and solves a giant problem that we run into otherwise. Another thing that we ran into more with Excel is, and I'm sure everyone else has run into this too, where people, send spreadsheets back and forth, and you have 3 or 4 copies that all have different changes. People add their own columns. People change the data validation because they want to type in something that we don't want them to. And then the other issue is if you change a spreadsheet, unless you're going and making copies of it over time, and then you go and compare the different copies, you really have no way to know who changed what. Someone could go in and make a whole bunch of changes, add a whole bunch of items, delete a bunch of stuff on purpose or on accident, and you have no record of it. It's just gone. So in Quickbase, we're able to add a change log and be able to really easily see who changed what, when they changed it, so we can run metrics. If there's ever a question, we can go say, hey, Bob, I see you made this change. What's going on? Instead of before there's that change made and nobody really knows why.
Awesome. So some of the ways that Quickbase made a difference in your app include saving several hours each day, building better communication with your clients, building better reports and metrics, and then also more accountability. Sound about right?
Yeah, exactly. This chart here is one that we're able to generate because we moved our design review comments in a Quickbase. And so we sometimes run into cases where we have a schedule and then something doesn't get done by the date it's supposed to. And then the question comes up, why? And a lot of times you wouldn't really know. But now we can look and see this is the status of all the comments over time. So you can see like at the beginning, all that gray is we took action and felt like they were closed, but we hadn't gotten a response from the client yet. And then over time, you can see on that blue ones, they're actually adding more comments and closing some of the existing ones. And they're reopening some of the existing ones as well. But it took them, a good week to do that versus if they had, responded a little sooner, then maybe that would be a different situation. And then you can see how quickly we're able to close those new comments, and then they responded quickly too, and we were able to close them out. But that's something, if it were in Excel, there's no way we could have even been able to get that data.
Wow, that's awesome. And that's a very pretty chart.
Thank you.
All right. So let's get into a demo. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All you.
All right. Okay. This is the design review comments applications. And the purpose of this is when we do a design, before we issue it, we do a review. And the ideal case is that everyone looks at the design and says, great, good to go. But of course, usually there are issues that are found. And so the design review comments are the things that people have found that need some action taken to fix the design. So this is the landing page. It has some things like training. So people who are new to application can just go download this and get some training on how they're supposed to use it. In general, Quickbase navigation and tips and tricks. This up here is a schedule of upcoming packages, some kind of navigation on the left for different metrics, and then an overview of which packages have the most comments. All right, the main meat of this application is in the design review comments table, as you might imagine. Pretty much all of the users go in through here. Just wait for that to load. All right, so this is the list of all of the comments. And so the general workflow is, so we'll open up this comment. So they would pick which package and review it is. So we have different packages that we bundle our work in. And then the reviews are generally when it's 30, 60, 90% complete, we'll do a review, just, milestones. And so this says, when the comment was made, which review it was at. The author is the person who wrote the comment. The comment is the thing that needs to be done, the action that is required from the person to make a change and fix or improve the design. The owner is the person who is supposed to take the action. So the author would go in here and they would fill all this out at the top and then save it to Quickbase. Then the owner would come back in, and this section is for documents if we have anything we want to refer to. It's optional, but sometimes it's useful. The owner would go in here. So they would fill out the action required. So this is the thing that they feel like they need to do to make a change. So this might say like, oh, there's no power to some tool. And this would say, oh, I need to add blah, blah, blah panel or whatever. And then so they would do that. And then only after they've actually completed that action, they would come back in here and type it into the owner action taken closure description. And this is in a pen field, so it logs all changes made. And a lot of times, well, hopefully not a lot of times, sometimes what will happen is the owner will take an action that they feel closes it. Then the author will go back and look and they'll say, no, I don't feel like that's really what was needed. And so they'll amend their comment and reopen it. And then the owner will maybe put another action. So this kind of keeps track of the actions taken over time in that conversation, which can be useful when it starts going back and forth. This right here is a classification. We use this only internally, and this is another perk of putting it in a database like Quickbase, is it's easy for us to make it so only people internally can see this. And this just helps us track why we felt was the cause for this comment. Because like I said, ideally you get no comments. The design is perfect and you don't have to make any changes. So we're always trying to work towards that ideal. And we use this classification to kind of identify maybe what the cause was. So that could be something like we didn't consider constructability or safety, or it could be something that the client changed their mind partway through. And so maybe isn't something we could do anything about. We do it internal just so people don't get into this debate about was that comment really because I changed my mind or because you missed something, because we're not interested in that. We just want to improve our process. It's not about blame, it's just about improvement. So the last one here is the status. And as I said, that kind of goes through the open, the author creates a comment, acknowledge. So this is when the owner goes in, looks at the comment, and they agree action needs to be taken. And so they acknowledge it to kind of show themselves that they need to go still take action on that. Sometimes they skip this one. If it's something easy, they can just close. But this is if they want to track that intermediate step. Action taken is when the owner feels like they've done what's needed to close the comment. And then close is when the author goes and reviews the change and confirms that that is what was needed. So there is a little bit of data validation. So as the author, I wouldn't be able to set this to owner acknowledged because only the owner can acknowledge a comment. You see there, if I try to do it, I get this little message saying, you must be the owner to set to owner acknowledged. Because that's a little bit of an accountability thing where we want people to say, yes, I agree, this is something I need to do. There's also another status. I'll pull up a different one that has someone else as the owner. So the owner also can't close it. It has to be the author who says, yes, this fulfills my concern and the action is resolved. So if as the owner, I try to skip that and like, oh, they don't need to confirm this, I'm just going to close it. I get a similar error saying you must be the author to set it to close. And another cool thing about this, I'll go back to that first comment to show this part, is there's a changelog. So here you could see a typical history for a comment where someone goes and adds in that first comment, all that first fields when they initially create it. The owner goes in, says, yeah, I acknowledge I need to do this and this is what I need to do. Once they go and actually complete the action, the owner would go in again and change the status and fill out the closure description. And finally, the author would say, yes, this is complete, and close it. So any field that's changed, it gets logged in here. And so we have accountability and transparency, and we can always go to the right person and figure out what's going on. All right, and that's my app. So I will transfer it back over to you, Nashmia.
Thank you very much. That was an awesome demo. So Kat touched upon a couple of things that I'm going to talk about a little bit. So some advanced Quickbase functionality. Firstly, let's talk about that changelog. What Kat is using in the back to build that changelog is something we call webhooks. For those of you who don't know what webhooks are, webhooks help you automate simple workflows or fire automated HTTP messages to third-party services based on the same event triggers and constraints available for email notifications. So Quickbase Webhooks, again, uses the HTTP API, which is a collection of calls for accessing Quickbase applications over the web. It is a RESTful API over HTTP with XML payloads. So using the Quickbase API, what can you do? Well, you can provide secure access to Quickbase and Quickbase applications. You can manage access through Quickbase roles and features. You can automate the application lifecycle. So you can create, delete, copy, or clone number of applications. You can also use webhooks to create, modify, and delete applications tables and fields within those tables. And then you could do what Kat did. You can use webhooks to add, update, delete, and query table records. You can also think of webhooks in situations where you want to kick off some sort of a third-party request, maybe through Workato or through pipelines. That's something new that we've launched, which is low-code integration. You can think of a scenario where you want to create a Slack notification when a status field changes inside of your application. And then you can also initiate some Quickbase actions as part of a triggered workflow, kind of like Kat did for her changelog. Cool. So the next thing I want to talk a little bit in depth about are data validation or custom rules. So Kat used these to restrict access to owners from changing a certain type of status and authors changing a certain type of status. So what can you do with these custom rules? Well, you can write formulas at the table level to make sure invalid data isn't allowed. These formulas consist of conditions where the data is not valid and should not be saved. And you can utilize if functions within a formula listing each invalid condition along with a matching error message to display with it. So let's get back inside of Kat's application to give an in-depth demo of both of these functionalities. So Kat, back to you.
All right, so I will show you the changelog first. So the changelog is in a separate table, and it's a pretty simple. It has kind of the fields you expect, what record was changed, the change type. So this lets us easily differentiate between add, replace, and delete. Table name. This isn't really necessary in this application because there's only one table. But if you have a more complex application, then this is really useful. Field name, the field that was changed, what the value was before the change, what the value was after, who made the change, and when. Pretty simple. Only relationship is between it and the design review comments table. And it uses a webhook, as Nashmia said. So I will show you that in the design review comments table under the settings. So every time a design review comment is changed in any way, this runs. The endpoint URL is just the, this is the table ID. I use realm host instead of typing in the actual URL because if for any reason this changes, and that could be because you decided to rename your realm or you decided to copy this application to a different realm, then this will update automatically. So you might think that's not very likely to happen, but is come in handy multiple times for me. And I'm glad that I changed them all to do this. So the Quickbase action that I'm using is import from CSV. And that's an API that kind of lets you do the same thing if you're importing from Excel into Quickbase from the user interface. Does pretty much the same thing. And this looks really intimidating, but it's actually not that complicated. And the documentation I found is really good to help you figure out exactly what you need to put in here. But essentially, there's just this, has this repeat on. And so for every record that's edited, it has a line for each field. So this first line would be for the field info AR. And it has all those things I talked about when I showed you the changelog. It has the action, so that's whether it's add, replace, delete, which record was changed, the table name, when it was, who last modified it, who modified it. This is the field name. And this is kind of a cool thing that you can do with webhooks is if you put old dot in front of the field name, then this will give you the value before the record was changed. So let's let me get the value before the change. And then this is the value after the change. And so it's the same line for every single field. The only difference on each line is those last few things where it's the name of the field and then the old and new value of the field. And then it just goes and repeats like that for each field. This at the bottom is the list of fields I'm importing into. It's just the field IDs. You can get that from the field settings. So that's pretty simple once you understand what it is. Then the second part of this is because a record is added for every single field. Oh, and the other cool thing about this, and this is why I use webhooks and not automations, is because it lets you do this import from CSV. So this runs one time, no matter how many records you edit. So if I were to do an import from Excel and import 1,000 records, then this still runs once. It takes just a few seconds. Usually, as soon as you make the change and you go to look, it'll be there. So unlike an automation where it would have to run once for every single record that was changed, and that can take a long time, this is very fast, doesn't use very many API calls. So that's why I use a webhook. So the second part of this is there's a webhook in the changelog. So because it adds a record for every field that's in the table, but not necessarily all those fields were changed. And usually only like 1 or 2 fields will be changed. So to prevent having a whole bunch of records that are changes, but they're not really anything changed, I have a report that just has a filter on it that says if the old value is equal to the new value. And then this webhook goes and uses the purge records API and deletes everything in that report. So the first webhook runs, adds a whole bunch of records, and again, it only adds them all at once. And then this runs also one time after all those records are added and deletes everything that's not really a change. So that leaves me with the changelog that we saw that's really clean. It just shows the fields that are changed. It doesn't show a bunch of other things that you don't need to search for. One last part. So like I told you about the realm host, this is also a similar thing. It refers to the current table ID. So if you're using a webhook that runs on itself, you can do this. And then if you copy the application or copy the table or anything like that, you don't have to do anything to change this. It'll still work perfectly, which is pretty cool. So that is the changelog. The other thing that we talked about was the data validation. So that's a setting back in the design review comments settings. And it is under this advanced settings here, all the way at the bottom. So make sure that you check this checkbox or it won't actually run. So I have a field in here called previous status. So that was the status before the user saved the records. And this actually uses the changelog. So as I said, this design review comments table is related to that changelog. And I use summary fields to find out what the status was before this change was made. So, and then I have new status, which is just the current status. And the reason I do this is because if you're in grid edit, this data rule will run on every single record. So if I'm an owner and I'm trying to set something to owner acknowledged, or even if I'm not, if I'm just editing records, and there's another comment that's already closed, if I didn't have this check, if the status had changed, then it wouldn't let me save because it would say, hey, you're not allowed to set status to close, even though I'm not even editing that record at all. So because obviously grid edit is a really useful feature and we want our users to be able to use it because it saves tons and tons of time, I added this check. So it says, if the status has changed, if the old status is not the new status, then and only then do I do a check. If the status is not changed, it doesn't run at all. So then it's pretty simple. If the status is 2, that's acknowledged, and the user is not the owner, then I give them that message we saw. You must be the owner to set the status to owner acknowledged. Same thing if status is 6, which is closed, and the user is not the author, then it says you must be the author to set to close. And that's all there is to it. So Nashmia, I will go ahead and transfer it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So we're going to wrap it up with some of our learnings from this session. So what did we learn today? What did we talk about? We talked about how Jacobs uses Quickbase in a design review use case. And thank you so much, Kat, for demoing that beautiful application for us. We also looked at some of the challenges that Jacobs faced before using Quickbase. So things related to transparency and accountability and using lots of spreadsheets going back and forth. Then we dug a little bit deeper into the use of webhooks and how Kat used webhooks to create an automated workflow to track her change logs. And then we also saw how you can use data validation rules to help you restrict invalid data. So I hope that this session has been valuable for you. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll start to take questions now.